11 Worst and Most Cruel Golden Age Parents. The glitz and glamour of Hollywood's golden age hid dark family secrets that would shock even today's tabloid readers. Behind the perfect smiles of beloved child stars were parents who exploited, abused, and psychologically damaged their famous children. These weren't just pushy stage parents, they were architects of genuine trauma whose actions still echo through Hollywood history. From stolen fortunes to psychological manipulation, from physical abuse to blatant exploitation, these stories reveal the devastating price many beloved stars paid for their fame. The most heartbreaking part? Many of these children continued desperately seeking approval from parents who saw them as meal tickets rather than children to be protected. Let's expose the worst parenting in Hollywood history. The stories studios worked overtime to keep hidden from public view. When a child becomes a family's primary breadwinner, normal parent-child dynamics warp beyond recognition. Add in the pressures of fame, the absence of meaningful child labor laws in early Hollywood, and an industry that prioritized profit over welfare, and you have the perfect storm for abuse and exploitation. What makes these stories particularly disturbing is the contrast between the wholesome public images these families projected and the private suffering happening behind closed doors. Let's examine 11 of Hollywood's most disturbing cases of parental exploitation, stories that will forever change how you see these beloved stars.
Yes, well, it's true, you know. I've had, maybe it will distress a lot.
Judy Garland's mother, Ethel Gum, the architect of destruction. Ethel Gum forced her daughter into show business at age 2, recognizing Judy's extraordinary talent as a ticket to the success she never achieved herself. By the time Judy signed with MGM at 13, Ethel had already established the pattern that would haunt her daughter's life, pushing her relentlessly while ignoring her physical and emotional needs. When MGM doctors prescribed amphetamines to control Judy's weight and barbiturates to help her sleep, a combination that would lead to lifelong addiction, Ethel didn't protect her child. Instead, she actively enforced this dangerous regimen, monitoring Judy's pill consumption and reporting any resistance back to studio handlers. "The studio doctors know what they're doing," Ethel would insist when Judy complained. "Do you want a career or not?" The final betrayal came financially. Despite Judy becoming one of Hollywood's biggest child stars, she discovered in adulthood that very little of her substantial earnings remained. Ethel had spent lavishly, often on personal indulgences that did little to benefit her daughter. MGM staff developed such disdain for Ethel that one production assistant reportedly nicknamed her the Real Wicked Witch, a darkly ironic reference to the film that would define Judy's career. Even by exploitative 1930s Hollywood standards, Ethel's willingness to sacrifice her daughter's well-being for career advancement stood out as extreme. As one MGM contemporary succinctly observed, "She didn't raise a daughter, she raised a product."
The early records, and I was a fan of all the great bands, and just to be a part of that scene.
2. Bing Crosby, America's beloved crooner, Hollywood's hidden tyrant. Few stars maintained a more carefully constructed public image than Bing Crosby. To millions of Americans, he represented the ideal of relaxed, good-natured fatherhood. His annual Christmas specials showcased a seemingly warm family man surrounded by his talented children. This carefully cultivated persona made the eventual revelations about his actual parenting all the more shocking. In 1983, Bing's eldest son, Gary, published Going My Own Way, painting a devastating portrait of life with the beloved singer. According to Gary, Bing's discipline methods included weekly weigh-ins for the Crosby boys, with beatings administered if they had gained more than 2 pounds. If we gained weight, we got beaten, with a cane, a belt, whatever was handy, Gary wrote. These weren't minor spankings, but significant assaults that left welts and bruises. Initially dismissed as a troubled son's exaggerations, these allegations gained credibility when Gary's brothers Philip and Dennis confirmed the abuse. "We were beaten with leather straps when we were growing up," Philip told People magazine, while attempting to rationalize the abuse as ultimately beneficial, a troubling indicator of how thoroughly the Crosby sons had normalized their father's behavior. The contrast was perhaps most stark in Crosby's Christmas specials, where he appeared alongside his sons in seemingly warm family performances. What viewers couldn't see was the backstage reality described by Gary. Before those Christmas specials, he'd be hitting us if we made a mistake in rehearsal. Then we'd have to go out and be the perfect family. As one entertainment historian noted, America's favorite crooner left bruises and trauma off camera. This assessment captures the painful duality at the heart of the Crosby story. a beloved entertainer whose public work brought joy to millions while his private behavior inflicted lasting damage on his own children.
Well, I'm stage struck, and I think they all know that. Secondly, I try to get a film that has audience.
3. Joan Crawford, Mommy Dearest, Hollywood's Nightmare. Few Hollywood parenting scandals have captured the public imagination like the relationship between Joan Crawford and her adopted daughter, Christina. When Mommy Dearest was published in 1978, its shocking allegations transformed Crawford's legacy overnight, introducing the phrase, "no wire hangers," into popular culture. According to Christina, life with Joan Crawford was defined by unpredictable rage, physical abuse, and psychological torture disguised as discipline. The infamous wire hanger incident, Crawford discovering wire hangers in Christina's closet and beating her while screaming about expensive wooden hangers, became the defining image of her alleged parental abuse, though Christina described it as just one example of routine violence. Beyond physical abuse, Christina detailed patterns of psychological cruelty designed to assert control. Crawford allegedly subjected her children to bizarre punishments, including forcing Christina to wear a dress that another child had given her as a birthday present to school every day until it fell apart, to teach her not to be spoiled. Perhaps most disturbing were the night checks, late-night inspections where Crawford would allegedly wake Christina suddenly, examining her hygiene and posture, and punishing any perceived deficiency with cold showers or additional chores. These unpredictable intrusions created an atmosphere where Christina never felt safe, even in sleep. While some of Crawford's friends defended the actress, several household staff members corroborated key incidents, including former nanny Vera Parker, who confirmed witnessing physical discipline she considered excessive. The most revealing evidence may come from Crawford's own behavior. After her death, it was discovered that she had explicitly disinherited Christina and her brother Christopher from her will with the infamous line, "It is my intention to make no provision herein for my son Christopher or my daughter Christina, for reasons which are well known to them." As one studio executive observed after reading Mommy Dearest, wire hangers were just the beginning. This assessment captures the disturbing reality that the infamous incidents were merely visible manifestations of a more pervasive pattern of psychological control that defined life in the Crawford household.
You must really know yourself where you got robbed. which was it?
I don't know.
4. Natalie Wood's mother, Maria Zakharenko, the ultimate stage mother. Maria Zakharenko's obsession with making Natalie Wood a star began practically at birth. According to family accounts, she consulted a fortune teller who predicted her daughter would become famous but die in dark water. Rather than being horrified by this prophecy, which took on disturbing significance after Natalie's drowning death, Maria became fixated on fulfilling the fame portion of the prediction. By age 4, Natalie was being dragged to auditions across Los Angeles, with Maria coaching her on how to charm directors and producers. This coaching went beyond typical stage mother encouragement. She specifically taught her young daughter to exhibit precocious, somewhat flirtatious behaviors with adult men in positions of power. "She didn't protect her, she packaged her," noted one casting director who worked with the young Natalie. This packaging included dressing Natalie in ways that emphasized her beauty while instructing her to be extra nice to important men, creating uncomfortable situations where a child was essentially being coached to use charm as professional currency. According to Natalie's sister Lana, Maria deliberately arranged for a teenage Natalie to be alone with powerful older men who could advance her career. One such incident allegedly involved a meeting between 16-year-old Natalie and a famous actor-producer nearly 3 decades her senior. When Natalie returned visibly distressed, Maria reportedly responded, not with concern, but with cold calculation. "It could help your career." When 8-year-old Natalie broke her wrist during filming, Maria allegedly instructed her to continue working and not tell anyone until filming completed, concerned that a production delay might damage her reputation as a professional. Unlike some exploitative parents who faded from their children's lives in adulthood, Maria maintained extraordinary control over Natalie well into her adult years, creating significant tension in her daughter's marriages and friendships. The tragic irony is that while Maria succeeded in making Natalie a star, she may have contributed to the psychological patterns that played a role in her daughter's troubled relationships and untimely death. By training Natalie from earliest childhood to prioritize pleasing others over her own needs, Maria created an adult who struggled to identify and protect her own boundaries.
Of Americans as a child movie star plays her greatest role at 17.
5. Shirley Temple's parents. The perfect smile, the stolen fortune. Shirley Temple remains the definitive child star. Those dimples, those curls, that precocious talent that charmed Depression-era America. Behind that perfect smile, however, was a story of financial exploitation that would eventually lead to significant reforms in how child performers' earnings were protected. George and Gertrude Temple seemed like devoted parents, carefully managing their daughter's unprecedented career. What wasn't apparent to the public was that they were also spending her money at an alarming rate. By the time Shirley turned 18 in 1946, she discovered that of the more than $3.2 million she had earned, equivalent to over $40 million today, only $44,000 remained. Her father, who had managed her finances without court supervision, a practice later prohibited by the Coogan Law, had invested much of her earnings in highly speculative ventures that failed. Other substantial sums had gone toward maintaining a lavish family lifestyle that collapsed once Shirley's career cooled in her teens. More disturbing than the financial mismanagement were allegations that emerged years later about the Temples' willingness to ignore troubling behavior on set. According to several accounts, including statements from other child actors of the era, Shirley was sometimes subjected to inappropriate treatment by directors and crew members that her parents either missed or chose not to address, as long as her career continued to flourish. In her 1988 autobiography, Shirley herself described incidents where adult male directors used disturbingly manipulative tactics to extract emotional performances from her, including once being told, falsely, that her dog had died to make her cry for a scene. While she was careful not to directly accuse her parents of negligence, the implications were clear. Her welfare was secondary to her professional obligations. The Temples maintained tight control over every aspect of Shirley's public image, while seemingly paying less attention to her private development. She received minimal formal education, had few friendships with non-famous children, and was essentially denied a normal childhood while generating massive wealth that primarily benefited the adults around her. As one film historian noted, they made her smile and made her pay for it. This observation captures the transactional nature of Shirley's childhood, a period when her primary value to her parents appeared to be as a financial asset rather than a child deserving protection and nurturing.
But Joan, let me interfere for one moment.
You can do anything you want, Lana.
Well, I only have...
6. Lana Turner's mother, Mildred Francis, the enabler of exploitation. Mildred Francis Turner has the distinction of being perhaps the most passive stage parent on our list. Not because she was less exploitative, but because her particular brand of parental failure came through negligence rather than active control. As Lana Turner transformed from innocent teenager to major sex symbol, her mother's primary parenting strategy appeared to be looking the other way. When 16-year-old Lana was discovered at Schwab's drugstore, or the Top Hat Cafe depending on which Hollywood legend you believe, she almost immediately began receiving attention from much older men in positions of power. Rather than protecting her daughter from potentially exploitative situations, Mildred seemingly embraced the opportunities these connections might bring. As Turner's career quickly advanced from bit parts to leading roles, studio executives and directors began promoting her as a sex symbol while she was still legally a child. Promotional materials emphasized her physical development and sweater girl image, creating a sexualized public persona for a teenager. Mildred not only allowed this marketing strategy, but actively encouraged Lana to lean into these provocative roles and publicity opportunities. Most concerning was Mildred's attitude toward her daughter's relationships with adult men. When 17-year-old Lana became involved with a 38-year-old band leader, Mildred raised no objections. This pattern continued throughout Lana's teenage years, a series of relationships with significantly older men that her mother either explicitly approved or strategically ignored. She managed Lana's career and mismanaged her childhood, observed one MGM publicity staff member who worked closely with the Turners during this period. This assessment captures the fundamental failure of Mildred's parenting, treating her underage daughter as an adult while abdicating the protective responsibilities that might have interfered with Lana's rapidly advancing career. The consequences of this parental negligence played out across Lana's adult life in a series of troubled relationships, including her involvement with gangster Johnny Stompanato, who was later killed by Lana's teenage daughter in what was ruled a justifiable homicide to protect her mother. The cyclical nature of inadequate parenting was painfully evident in how Turner, herself raised without proper boundaries, struggled to create stability for her own child. Unlike some Hollywood parents who actively push their children into inappropriate situations, Mildred's exploitation was more passive, a willingness to accept the benefits of her daughter's career while ignoring the psychological costs of premature sexualization and adult responsibilities. This form of neglect, while less visibly abusive than some others on our list, created lasting damage that would shape Turner's relationships and self-image throughout her life.
The whole works, baby, the whole works.
Yeah, and he sent me out looking like a mammy singer, and I don't take that from anybody.
7. Mickey Rooney, Sr., the father who wasn't there. While Mickey Rooney became one of Hollywood's most beloved child stars, projecting wholesome all-American charm in the Andy Hardy series and numerous musicals with Judy Garland, his own experience of fatherhood was defined by absence and abuse. His father, Joe Yule Sr., Mickey was born Joe Yule Jr. before adopting his stage name, represented a particularly damaging form of parental exploitation, extracting financial benefit while providing neither emotional support nor basic stability. Joe Yule Sr. was a vaudeville performer whose career was faltering just as his young son's talents were becoming evident. Rather than nurturing Mickey's gifts from a place of parental pride, the elder Yule reportedly viewed his son primarily as a means to financial security, a perspective that became increasingly problematic as he descended further into alcoholism. According to Mickey's later accounts, his father's drinking led to explosive violence directed at both Mickey and his mother. These episodes became so severe that Mickey's mother eventually fled with her son, but the damage had already been done. Mickey had witnessed his father's rage, experienced the fear of unpredictable violence, and absorbed the fundamental message that his value was tied to his earning potential rather than his inherent worth as a child. Even after physically removing themselves from Joe's presence, Mickey and his mother couldn't escape his financial demands. As Mickey's career took off at MGM, Joe would periodically resurface to demand money, leveraging his parental status to extract funds that typically fueled further drinking. MGM executives eventually became involved, arranging for structured payments to Joe that would limit his access to amounts that might exacerbate his alcoholism while preventing him from directly harassing his son. The child star everyone adored was raised by a man who couldn't be bothered, noted one MGM contemporary who witnessed the complicated dynamic between Mickey and his occasionally present father. This observation captures the painful irony of Mickey's situation. While portraying idealized versions of American boyhood that emphasized family values and paternal guidance, he himself had experienced primarily neglect and exploitation from his own father. The long-term impact of this relationship manifested in Mickey's own struggles with substances and relationships in adulthood. Having lacked a positive model of fatherhood, he sometimes replicated problematic patterns in his own family dynamics, a legacy of intergenerational trauma that began with Joe Yule Sr.'s fundamental failure to prioritize his child's welfare over his own immediate desires. Unlike some of the more controlling parents on our list, Joe Yule Sr.'s exploitation was defined more by what he didn't provide, protection, stability, emotional support, than by direct manipulation. This absence of proper parenting created its own form of damage, leaving Mickey to navigate the treacherous waters of child stardom without the guidance and protection that might have helped him avoid some of the pitfalls that later complicated his adult life.
He was very controlling.
He was.
Yes. And I was...
8. Tippi Hedren, Mothering on the Wild Side. Tippi Hedren's relationship with her daughter Melanie Griffith presents one of the more unusual cases of problematic Hollywood parenting, less about direct exploitation and more about boundaries so unconventional they verged on reckless endangerment. While Hedren wasn't actively pushing her daughter into premature stardom for financial gain, her parenting choices created situations that most child development experts would consider profoundly inappropriate. The most startling example of Hedren's unconventional parenting was her decision to raise Melanie in their home at Shambhala Preserve, a wildlife preserve sanctuary housing numerous big cats and other dangerous animals. This environment, while perhaps educational in some respects, exposed Melanie to genuine physical danger on a routine basis. The family documented multiple incidents where both Tippy and Melanie were injured by the animals, including several serious mauling incidents that required medical attention. Photos from this period show young Melanie in alarmingly close proximity to fully grown lions and tigers, images that today would likely trigger immediate intervention from child protection authorities. Hedren, however, seemingly viewed these interactions as normal, even beneficial aspects of her daughter's upbringing. Perhaps even more concerning was Hedren's approach to Melanie's early acting career. When 14-year-old Melanie was cast in the film The Herod Experiment, ironically starring her mother's ex-husband and Melanie's then-stepfather Don Johnson, Hedren raised no objections to her underage daughter appearing in scenes requiring partial nudity. The film's focus on sexual experimentation made these scenes particularly inappropriate for an actress who was legally still a child. This willingness to allow her daughter to be sexualized on screen at such a young age represents a troubling abdication of parental responsibility. Whether motivated by a misguided belief in artistic freedom or a failure to recognize the potential exploitation involved, Hedren's decision established a pattern that would continue throughout Melanie's early career, roles that emphasized her sexuality long before she had reached legal adulthood. Her parenting was avant-garde and borderline reckless, observed one film critic who followed both women's careers. This assessment captures the fundamental problem with Hedren's approach, confusing progressive, open-minded parenting with a lack of appropriate boundaries and protections. The consequences of these parenting choices became evident in Melanie's tumultuous young adulthood, including substance abuse issues and a series of relationships that began when she was still very young. While Melanie would eventually stabilize and build a successful career and family life, the unusual circumstances of her upbringing created challenges that a more conventionally protected childhood might have avoided. What makes Hedren's case particularly interesting is that unlike many Hollywood parents who exploited their children for financial gain, her problematic parenting appears to have stemmed from genuinely held, if misguided, philosophical beliefs about child rearing. This doesn't excuse the risks to which she exposed her daughter, but it does represent a different category of parenting failure than the more calculated exploitation seen in other Hollywood families.
In his little boarding school, he wrote, produced, built this.
9. Henry Fonda, the distant icon. Henry Fonda presented a particularly American contradiction, an actor renowned for playing warm, principled fathers in classics like The Grapes of Wrath and 12 Angry Men, while being emotionally unavailable to his own children. Unlike some entries on our list, Fonda's parenting failures weren't about exploitation or abuse, but rather a profound emotional absence that left lasting scars on his children, particularly his daughter Jane. According to both Jane and Peter Fonda's accounts, their father was pathologically unable to express affection or approval. "I never heard him say, 'I love you,'" Jane has stated in numerous interviews. This emotional withholding created a household where the Fonda children constantly strived for a paternal acknowledgement that rarely, if ever, came. The situation was exacerbated by the self-death of their mother, Frances Ford Seymour, when Jane was 12 and Peter was 10. Following this tragedy, Henry Fonda's emotional distance only increased. Rather than helping his children process their grief, he essentially shut down discussions about their mother entirely. According to Jane, the family never spoke about Frances after her death, creating a massive emotional void at a time when the children most needed support and openness. Henry's coldness manifested in criticism rather than violence, a constant stream of judgments about everything from Jane's appearance, "You're fat, you need to do something about it," to her career choices. These critiques were rarely balanced with positive feedback, creating a one-sided relationship where Jane and Peter knew clearly what their father found wanting, but had little sense of what might earn his approval. "He played upright heroes, but never showed love at home," noted one family friend who observed the Fondas over many years. This observation captures the painful irony at the heart of Henry Fonda's parenting. His extraordinary ability to project warmth and moral certainty on screen contrasted sharply with his inability to provide those same qualities to his own children. What makes Fonda's emotional neglect particularly significant in Hollywood history is how it influenced his children's development, especially Jane's. By her own account, Her father's withholding created patterns of insecurity and approval-seeking that shaped both her relationships with men and her political activism, the latter being in part an attempt to establish an identity distinct from her father's, while simultaneously seeking the kind of purpose and moral clarity he embodied on screen, but not at home. Unlike the financial exploitation or physical abuse evident in other Hollywood families, Henry Fonda's parenting demonstrates how emotional neglect can create its own profound damage that shaped his children's lives and careers in ways that continue to resonate through their artistic work and public statements even decades after his death.
The trouble ain't with that turkey, Mr. Jim. It's you.
I feel all right.
10. Louise Beaver's father, crushing a star before she could shine. While most entries on our list involve parents who exploited their children's talent, Louise Beavers represents a different but equally destructive pattern. A parent who actively attempted to prevent his daughter's artistic expression and success due to his own limited vision of what was possible for a young black woman in early 20th century America. Louise Beavers would eventually become one of Hollywood's most recognizable black actresses of the 1930s and 1940s, appearing in over 160 films, despite being limited to the domestic servant roles that were virtually the only opportunities available to black actresses of her era. Her path to even this constrained success, however, was complicated by her father's active opposition to her performing ambitions. According to Beaver's own accounts in rare interviews, her father demanded she drop out of school as a teenager to enter domestic service work, the only career he believed appropriate and achievable for his daughter. When Louise expressed interest in performance, participating in school plays and later community theater, her father's response was harsh condemnation rather than support. She became a trailblazer, despite being told she'd never matter, noted one film historian specializing in early black cinema. This assessment captures the additional barrier Beavers faced compared to other young performers, not just the systemic racism of Hollywood, but active discouragement from within her own family. Perhaps most revealing about this difficult relationship was Beavers' admission that for years after establishing herself in Hollywood, she concealed her film work from her father, allowing him to believe she was employed in domestic service rather than acting. This deception speaks volumes about the psychological impact of his disapproval. Even as an adult finding success in her chosen field, she remained unable to directly challenge his limited vision for her life. While Beaver's father didn't exploit her talent for financial gain like many stage parents, his attempts to suppress her artistic ambitions represent a different form of parental failure, the inability to see and support a child's genuine gifts and aspirations. In a period when young black performers faced overwhelming external barriers to success, having to overcome parental opposition as well made Beavers' eventual achievements all the more remarkable. The lasting impact of this relationship can be seen in how rarely Beavers discussed her family in interviews throughout her career, a notable omission in an era when family connections were frequently highlighted in publicity materials. This silence suggests wounds that never fully healed, despite her professional accomplishments and the groundbreaking nature of her career as one of the first black actresses to receive featured billing in major studio productions.
The most successful ways to live life is, instead of trying to put others in their place.
11. Loretta Young, Motherhood Built on Deception. Loretta Young's place on this list represents a different kind of parental failure, not exploitation or abuse, but a decades-long deception that profoundly impacted her daughter's sense of identity and belonging. The story begins with Young's affair with Clark Gable while filming The Call of the Wild in 1935, which resulted in pregnancy at a time when an unmarried Catholic actress having a child would have meant career destruction. Rather than acknowledging the pregnancy, Young went into hiding, giving birth secretly before orchestrating an elaborate adoption of her own biological child. Judith Lewis grew up believing she was Loretta Young's adopted daughter, with no knowledge that Young was actually her birth mother or that Clark Gable was her biological father, despite the fact that her strong resemblance to Gable was widely noted. She built a career on innocence and kept her daughter in the dark, observed one Hollywood biographer who documented this extraordinary deception. This assessment captures the fundamental contradiction in Young's approach to motherhood. While providing materially for her daughter, she denied Judith the most basic truth about her own identity. The psychological impact of this deception became evident as Judith matured and began to notice her strong resemblance to Clark Gable, particularly his distinctive ears. When she mentioned this similarity to her mother, Young arranged for Judith to undergo painful cosmetic surgery to pin back her ears, a physical alteration designed to conceal the truth rather than acknowledge it. Young maintained this elaborate fiction for decades, using her Catholic faith to justify the deception as preferable to admitting an out-of-wedlock birth. It wasn't until Judith was an adult in her late 30s that she finally discovered the truth, not from her mother, but through her own investigation after years of suspecting something wasn't right about her official origin story. When confronted, Young initially continued to deny the truth before finally acknowledging that Judith was indeed her biological daughter with Gable. Even this admission was framed in terms that absolved Young of responsibility, suggesting that her relationship with Gable had elements of non-consent that later evidence would call into question. What makes this case particularly troubling from a parenting perspective is how Young's deception shaped her daughter's entire sense of self. Judith later described growing up feeling somehow different from Young's other children without understanding why, an intuitive sense of being treated differently that created deep-seated insecurities she couldn't articulate because she didn't know their source. The religious justification Young provided for her decades of dishonesty reveals a parent prioritizing her own image and comfort over her child's psychological well-being, choosing a path that protected her reputation while creating a foundation of falsehood for her daughter's understanding of her place in the world. While not as overtly abusive as other entries on our list, Young's treatment of her daughter demonstrates how parental deception can create its own profound damage, establishing patterns of mistrust and identity confusion that took Judith years of therapy to address even after finally learning the truth about her origins.